You're listening to PolicyRoom by SPRF.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of SPRF's new podcast series. We all know in the post-COVID world, the industrial sector and especially the MSME sector, overall economic growth and employment generation has taken a hit over the last few months. Today, we'll be discussing the issue of industrial growth and industrial investments in the country and how we can, in fact, make industries Atmanirbhar. Now, we have with us Mr. Ramesh Abhishek today. Mr. Ramesh Abhishek is a 1982 batch member of the Indian Administrative Service. He has been with the government in both roles within the country and abroad. He has almost 4 decades of experience, especially in the fields of designing and implementing public policy, large-scale reforms at national and subnational levels. Most recently, he led the team, spearheaded by the Prime Minister's flagship programs related to industrial investments, such as the ease of doing business, Make in India, Startup India. He has also developed and nurtured Invest India, which has been actually the most awarded investment promotion agency in the world. He has also worked on various other issues like immunization, literacy, and other development and welfare programs, especially in the state of Bihar. Mr. Ramesh Abhishek also holds master's degrees in public administration, international politics, and business administration from the Harvard Kennedy School, the Sikkim Manipal University, and the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. He has recently joined SPRF as a senior advisor, and we are truly honored to have on our team. Welcome to the first episode of SPRF's new podcast series, sir.
Thank you, Jitendra. It's such a pleasure to be part of this podcast, that too in the first of the series. And it has been a pleasure for me to join SPRF. And I look forward to working with a great team there. And I also look forward to discussing this very important subject with you today.
Now, we'll start with the MSME sector, which you had a close experience with working with the government. This is a very important sector, I think, second only to agriculture in terms of employment generation. It provides employment to roughly 110 million people in the country by last count. It also has a 40% share in India's total trade. It also has a sizable number of firms that add to somewhere close to 30% of the GDP. Now, what does it mean for MSMEs to be Atmanirbhar, sir, as the PM has coined the term? And in your view, what have been the most commonly observed constraints in the expansion and growth of this sector?
Jitendra, as you rightly mentioned, MSMEs are a huge source of employment in the country. They are also a big part of our industrial growth, our exports, and value addition in the country. And we have very smart entrepreneurs who really work hard and who can deliver world-class products and services. We all know that. But MSMEs in India also face a lot of challenges. The challenges were not so obvious, or they didn't matter so much until we did not have a great trade integration with the rest of the world. But now, after WTO, most of the restrictions and tariffs going down, they're a huge challenge, not only in exports, but also in the domestic market. Because whatever products they are producing, they face a lot of competition. So now we have to see what are the advantages that similar MSMEs enjoy or industries enjoy in other countries. See, in other countries, they have much easier access to capital, whether it's fixed capital or working capital. Their cost of capital is also much lower. In our case, the cost of capital is very high, mainly because of the high cost of intermediation from the lender to the borrower. This is a big disadvantage for our MSMEs, and this has been spoken of. Second challenge, I would say, is the cost of doing business overall, cost of capital being one part. Our compliances are very onerous. Most of the time, the compliances are as onerous for large industries as they are for the smaller industries. So a lot of time of entrepreneurs is spent in just doing the paperwork and the compliances. Things have got slightly easier in the last few years, definitely, but still we have a long way to go because we have to save them every possible cost. Third, I would say, is marketing. See, the marketing networks are not as developed, especially the electronic commerce for MSMEs. MSMEs should be able to sell their products all over the country through e-commerce as well as through the normal marketing channels. I think that has been a challenge. Another very critical part is the lack of the latest technologies. Our MSMEs don't always have the best technologies which are necessary to have an efficient production process. And other countries, they give huge subsidies for exports, which actually puts our MSMEs to great disadvantage. Skilling of labor and availability of skilled and re-skilled labor, that's another very big challenge. Obviously, we need to fix these problems if we want to make them a continuing big part of the economy and make sure that their contributions in terms of employment are matched by their contribution to the gross value add also in manufacturing.
That's a really great, informative answer. I don't really have a subsequent question to that because you've basically covered everything when it comes to what are the kind of constraints we have observed. Now, I'm going to pick up on a few general systemic constraints that industrial investments or new industries have to face in India, and not necessarily restricted to the MSME sector. So, issues like land acquisition, labor and environmental compliances, such issues. Among these, new enterprises, based on a Niti Aayog report, seem to spend the highest time in acquiring land, which is 156 days, construction permits, 112 days, and labor-related approvals, which is like 74 days on an average. Now, answer to that would be red tapeism at the local administration level. Now, how much of the reform question then fall on the central government, and how much of it falls on the state governments in this regard?
See, so far as the central government is concerned, the role of central government is to basically provide for a very efficient financial sector. Now, that is a job not to be done by the states, of course. So I think if we have efficient banking industries, NBFCs, where the administrative costs are much lower, then they can actually lend at a much better rate. And also they need to adopt innovative lending practices. For example, depending on cash flows and not so much on fixed assets. So those are the kind of things that falls on the responsibility of central government. So far the environment thing is concerned, central government has streamlined the environmental clearances at the central level quite a bit. At one point of time, it used to take very long. Now I'm told that time taken has come down to more like, 140 or 50 days, which is much lower than what it used to be. The main delays in environmental clearance, including forest clearance, are at the state level. Labor compliances are almost all at the state level. Some improvement has been made of late by providing for one single return under 12 or 13 labor laws. Now, central government has also brought in 4 codes in which 48 odd labor laws have been kind of combined. There is not too much of reform there, but there is a lot of procedural reform. Substantive reforms are not too many in that because that's a much more ticklish subject. So basically, most of the compliances at the entry level for the industries, for the operational level when they are working, falls on the state governments. Whether it is fact inspection under Fact Act, whether it is giving of permissions, construction permit by the municipal corporations, electricity connections by the electricity distributing discoms. Similarly, all these approvals are given at the state level or sub-state level. So, a lot of these reforms which where industry deal with them falls on them. Of course, if you want to exit, then the insolvency and bankruptcy part again comes back to the central government, as you know. So a lot of complementarities in the role of central government and state government. But central government also has an important role. It may not be there under the constitution, but the central government always helps to facilitate the states in improvement of ease of doing business by sharing of good practices, by doing these rankings, by creating a competitive environment, and generally, pushing them and helping them do better. Also by sharing of common technology platforms. So the central government has a critical role, but I would think that 80% of the compliances, burden, approvals you mentioned about delays, time taken, they fall on the state government or agencies below the state government.
And in your experience, how responsive are state governments, to these reforms?
Since this ease of doing business ranking started among states, that was in year 2015, we have seen enormous improvement. There have been, like more than 15,000 administrative reforms, the time taken to give approvals by either construction permit or electricity or other approvals have significantly come down, and the costs have also come down. But this improvement has been over what used to exist prior to that. So there's still a lot of scope for improvement. One of the things that we had started when I was in the department, and that is being continued, is to rank states on the basis of feedback of users. Ask the private sector, ask the architects, ask the electrical inspectors, ask the lawyers whether the reforms claimed by the states are actually working. Because when I used to go to a lot of these industry associations, they used to say, "Sir, you're talking about single window, but we don't find any single window. We don't get the approvals in time as people are claiming." So we completely switched to a feedback-based assessment. That has made also some difference. But my take on this whole issue is, see, the governments have to appreciate, in general, the role of businesses in creating jobs and wealth and paying taxes, which are critical for functioning of the governments. I generally find that businesses struggle and they agitate their grievances as if other stakeholders don't have much to do with it. It's the problem of businesses. I would submit, and I have said it in the past in several forums, that the problem of businesses is not that of businesses alone. It's the problem of the country. You look at what other countries are doing. They are trying to create the best conditions for their businesses by providing a good infrastructure, providing simpler tax laws, by providing with the support that is they require, whether it's legislative support or administrative support and so on. So if you businesses are not doing well, then who is going to suffer? Not just businesses. It is the jobs that is going to suffer. It's the taxes. It is everything is going to suffer. That kind of, I think, commitment is required from regulators. It looks like as if businesses are working for themselves only. They are not. I think this appreciation needs to be widespread. It is there in bits and pieces here and there, but by and large, businesses fight a lone battle in trying to get reforms, in trying to reduce costs, in trying to get rid of archaic practices, which are mostly rent seeking. So, that's my long answer to your short question.
I will still say it's not as long. Certainly, this is a very important topic in a country where the word industry has been demonized, basically. I mean, that's what my observation is over my academic pursuits. I'm not sure if you'll agree with it. Anyway, so follow up to that would be the issue of labor and environmental compliances, even within the government, of trying to balance labor welfare and easier compliances on industries. It has been a challenge, and it's been met with a lot of protests also over the years. So my question is it even possible to maintain that balance?
I have had extensive discussions with representatives of employers and employees. My understanding is that, just think of an employer. Why would an employer try to fire workers unnecessarily? Why would an employer try to not skill their workers? One can understand that they may try to pay less than they should, but for which we have various Minimum Wages Act. They should create the right conditions in the factories so that working is safe. For that, we have the laws. So I think enforcement of the laws relating to creating safe conditions of working, paying the minimum wages, definitely should be rigorously implemented. There's no question about it. See, what people are looking for is that, suppose sometime many industries are seasonal in nature, export oriented. Now, if they don't get export orders, or if they are not doing well in a particular season for a particular reason, then they should have the flexibility to not hire those workers and again hire them later on when they have more orders and business. Now, that flexibility is given by any reasonable, let's say, regulator or a country, because that's very common sense. And I don't think that we as governments have really tried to appreciate that point of view at that much. We always think that employers would get rid of their workers if we give them the flexibility. I don't think so. The employers have a great stake in retaining their labor force for quite some time, very long time. You will know many people who have got their labor force for 30 years, for 20 years, and much longer. They have a stake in skilling them. They have a stake in keeping them happy because they know that without them, these industries are nowhere. And they will not be, it's not going to be easy to find new people to work with. So I think that we must ensure that labor is fully protected in terms of salaries, wages, and safe conditions of working, and opportunities of skilling and reskilling. All those things are extremely important. If a labor is properly skilled, that skilled person is going to find employment anywhere. The problem is that our skilling programs need to be more effective and widespread. They need to create a wider impact. You can imagine how much an unskilled person is going to earn. A skilled person is going to earn much more. So I think we should put some burden that apprentices, need to be hired as per the law. That will provide a lot of employment in the country, and that is where we need to push the employers. But giving flexibility of hiring and firing, let's say, within a reasonable limit, I think is something which is quite sensible and should be done. But the way the narrative of labor reforms or labor laws have panned out in the last 40, 50 years, any government finds it very difficult to implement this law. But I think a frank dialogue with the employees and employers and having these trust building measures is going to bring about the right balance. See, ultimately, if our industries cannot compete with industries in Vietnam and Thailand and China and other places, what are we going to do with all these archaic laws and mindset? I mean, there'll be nothing to protect after some time unless we take some right choices, we make sensible decisions to protect our competitiveness.
Which is where I was heading to next. I think you ended that answer at a really crucial point. In fact, one of the long-standing issues in manufacturing is the level of cost competitiveness in India, and increasingly, cost competitiveness with East Asian and Southeast Asian economies. As per the Global Manufacturing Risk Index 2020, India ranks third in terms, pretty respectable rank, but still behind China and Vietnam in terms of the cost scenario, at least overall operating costs for any industry. Now, we all know there's been an expected and also an ongoing flight of manufacturing units from China as industries become capital intensive there. And increasingly, industries are choosing Vietnam and even Indonesia for that matter. Now, it is high time for India to become the preferred destination for such companies. And so, in your experience, how successful has the government been over the last 6 years in making this a reality, making India a preferred destination?
See, the cost of logistics in India is very high. It's almost 14% of our GDP compared to 7% in China. These are all broad numbers. Vietnam has been a great pioneer in the last 15, 20 years in attracting manufacturing industries to that country. They had done very well, by the way, in attracting a lot of agriculture plantations also earlier. So once they set their mind to it, they actually do all the things that are required to achieve that. So China before and now Vietnam and maybe some other countries, but Vietnam is a really good example of late. They have created a really good world-class infrastructure. They give a lot of predictable tax benefits to industries. You don't have to pay any tax for 20 years or 30 years in some cases. In some cases, you have to pay a very low rate that gradually goes up and so on. Now, actually, I don't think the country losing out on tax revenue when you are giving such tax relief to new industries, because those industries were not there at all. So they were not paying you any tax in any case. But when the industries come, even if they don't pay you any direct tax, corporate tax, they pay a lot of indirect taxes. People who earn money through ancillaries and providing services, etc., to these industries, they pay taxes. And ultimately, these units also will pay a tax. So if you want to match the incentives given by these countries, if you don't match the facilities that they have created, then obviously, the industries also make a choice. India is a very attractive destination for large scale manufacturing because of several reasons. One of the foremost being availability of skilled manpower. People really want to come to India because the skilled manpower is very, very good. And also we have a rule of law, which is not there as effective in many parts of the world where people are going. So there is a predictability in our legal enforcement, though there are delays, but still it's better than many. And also it's a very good local market also. I mean, there's a large number of people though the domestic market is not as large as we would like to because the overall per capita incomes are very low. So I think people want to come here, and if we give them these similar facilities, not the identical facilities. For example, recently government came up with this production linked incentive scheme for electronics manufacturing. That is going to bring a lot of people here. But I think predictable policies, predictable tax regimes are very important. Sometimes we make changes in our regulations, in our tax policies, tax rates very quickly. And even so, for example, we announce a lower tax rate for new manufacturing. No one knows for how long it's going to be there. I don't think there's any decision that it will be there for next 10 years or 20 years, which means that it can change next year. So there's no predictability and it's difficult to plan. We want to attract industries which are definitely shifting from China. And with a lot of that shifting, I don't think people in China have a great problem because they have also gone over to the next level now. So now I think we should take advantage of this shift that is happening for economic region, for geopolitical regions, by providing these matching conditions. So the government is definitely working on these, but I'm definitely think that predictability in policies and taxes, tax rates, creating good infrastructure and giving them exactly, sometimes the incentives have to be customized also. See, everybody or every industry doesn't need the same incentives. I remember a case when one industry wanted to use in-house renewable power, whereas the state government was insisting that they must buy half of their power from their discom, which are all loss making, and because of cross subsidy the rates are very high. So obviously that multiple $1 billion investment went elsewhere. So we have to, if we really have that fire in us to bring all these investments in our country and create jobs and create wealth, then we need to be flexible, we need to be smart.
Certainly, flexibility is the keyword there. And this is my last question. The government, as you said, has already provided a lot of schemes to foster industrial growth, especially to guarantee-free loans, interest subvention, or market support, export promotion, concessions in electricity bills also. What can the government, realistically speaking, do over and above what it has already done? And where are things lacking on a practical level, sir?
Jitendra, the devil lies in the details. And everything depends on implementation. It's very easy to make a law or come out with a scheme, but to get it properly implemented, to achieve the objectives of that law or the policy or the scheme is the critical part. Now, in many states, there was a scheme that if you set up a manufacturing unit, you will get the refund of VAT to the extent of your capital investment. Now, when the GST came, all these schemes overnight disappeared. Now, the industries that had come out they had set up base in India or in that state, obviously they were completely shocked by this unpredictability. Well, of course, GST was a very modern and innovative law. It had to come. But the fact is that large number of industries, foreign and domestic, both suffered because of sudden disappearance of this VAT refund scheme. There are any number of issues at the local level relating to availability of electricity, reliable electricity, proper infrastructure, not being harassed by inspectors. See, those issues are there. It is more in some, less in some, but it has not disappeared. So what we were trying to do, what the government has been trying to do in the last few years, to use large-scale technology for basically, let's say, customer interface or a citizen interface, a business interface, so that this physical contact with inspectors and bureaucracy will go away. It is my experience of public service that if you have a physical contact with bureaucracy, to avoid corruption or to wish it away is going to be extremely difficult. You just have to make sure that no objection certificates, approvals are time bound, or a completely personal interface, and everybody has to transparently give decisions. And if they have a problem, they should say it online or electronically. So all these issues need to be addressed and be taken to the logical conclusion. Just by announcing a scheme or announcing an intention or making a coin, a slogan, really doesn't help the entrepreneurs at the local level. I think, as you said, see, the businesses have been kind of demonized in this country for various reasons. Crony capitalism, maybe for a long time. And our Bollywood films have only shown that being rich is supposed to be bad, and being poor is supposed to be very, very, it's a laudable, it's a kind of a dream. So the culture of the country has been such that earning wealth has been a kind of a bad thing. If that is how it is going to be, if our policies, mindsets, bureaucracy, regulators are all going to reflect that for forever, then I'm afraid that we are going to lose out heavily. We are already losing out to our competitors. We lost out long time back to advanced countries because of colonial rule. Then we lost out to China, Korea, and Southeast Asian countries. And now the smaller countries, Bangladesh, Philippines, Thailand, a lot of them are now going to get ahead of us if we don't get our act together and do the things that are required to be done.
That's a brilliant answer. Let me applaud that, sir, because you've covered a lot of different issues. The primary issue of focusing more on implementation and not necessarily on the launch of policy, which is the case in popular discourse. Even among policy think tanks, we tend to focus more on analyzing whether a policy has been launched or not, and less on how it is being implemented, whether there's a monitoring mechanism. That's one big issue. The other issue, certainly, which we discussed earlier also, was the mindset of people, the image of industries or a businessman or an entrepreneur in the mind of a common man. So I think that's a range of issues you've covered. Well, I hope our listeners were able to understand the various perspectives that are needed to actually create successful policy and implement them to foster industrial growth in the country when it comes to MSMEs, to small industries. I hope our listeners found it valuable, found it enjoyable.
I just want to add that by making very difficult and strict laws, which are meant to target only very few deviants, what we actually do is to make a very large number of our people non-compliant. And then we try to act against all of them. If you ban walking on the street, then everyone who walks becomes a criminal. So we make laws and regulations so difficult sometimes that people go into non-compliance. If you look at other countries, they make sensible laws which are more akin to human nature. But we have a huge dose of moralizing in this country, which very few people actually follow. But that goes into discourse of lawmaking and regulations. So they may not be the most practical and pragmatic of policies, and no one follows them. But it basically makes everyone non-compliant. Lots of them non-compliant, and the system struggles to bring about compliances. I think we really need to change this entire mindset and make sure that we have sensible laws, regulations, rules, processes in which people will just find it easier to do business. Otherwise, we are in this really vicious cycle of making impossible laws, very impractical policies, and non-implementable schemes, and then this whole series of non-compliances and high cost of doing business and losing out to competitors. So it's just a broader point I wanted to bring out that this entire approach needs to be relooked.
I think I don't need to add anything else that sums it up. All right, that's a wrap. Hope our listeners found it valuable, found it enjoyable. Thanks a lot for being with us on the podcast, sir, for the inaugural episode. We value your contribution as our team member and also over the last 40 years as an IS officer. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thank you, Jitendra. Thank you.